I'm Nathan, 35 years old, and I dedicated my entire adult life to my father's business. For 5 straight years, I ran the company, grew our profits, and expanded our client base while he gradually stepped back. When I finally asked for a raise after half a decade without one, his response floored me. "You're lucky to have this job." 2 weeks later, he hired my brother, the family's golden child, who had never worked a day in the industry, and paid him 4 times my salary. If you're watching this from your workplace break room, wondering if your loyalty is being taken for granted, hit subscribe and stick around. My story might save you years of thankless sacrifice. My grandfather started our manufacturing company in 1968 with nothing but a small loan and a big dream. He built it from the ground up, creating custom parts for industrial equipment. The business was modest but profitable, providing a good living for our family and eventually employing 20 people from our community. My father joined straight out of college, working alongside my grandfather for 15 years before taking over when my grandfather retired. I practically grew up in that factory. Some of my earliest memories are the distinctive smell of metal and machine oil, the rhythmic sounds of the equipment, and the camaraderie among the workers. While other kids played video games after school, I was learning how to operate lathes and read technical drawings. By 16, I could identify any flaw in a manufactured part just by looking at it. My father seemed proud of my interest, often telling me, "One day, all of this will be yours." Those words shaped my entire life trajectory. When it came time for college, I chose business management with a minor in manufacturing technology, specifically tailored to help me run the family business someday. While my friends pursued their passions or chased high-paying careers in finance and tech, I remained laser-focused on preparing myself to take over from my father. After graduation, I had offers from larger companies offering competitive salaries and clear advancement paths. A former classmate who went to work for a Fortune 500 company tried to recruit me, saying, "With your skills and background, you could start at $70,000 and be making 6 figures within 5 years." But I declined without hesitation. The family business was calling me home. My first years working full-time under my father were challenging. His management style was from another era, authoritarian, unyielding, and critical. Nothing I did seemed quite good enough. If I saved $10,000 by negotiating with a supplier, he'd ask why I hadn't saved $15,000. If I landed a new client, he'd question why their first order wasn't larger. "You need thick skin in this business," he would say whenever I showed frustration at his constant criticism. "I'm harder on you than anyone because you're my son. You represent me and everything I've built." Meanwhile, my younger brother Adam chose a completely different path. While I was the responsible one following in our father's footsteps, Adam was the free spirit, the dreamer, the risk-taker. He dropped out of college after 3 semesters, declaring it too constraining for his entrepreneurial spirit. Our father barely batted an eye at this decision that would have resulted in weeks of lectures had I made it. Adam bounced between various get-rich-quick schemes, cryptocurrency trading, drop-shipping businesses, multi-level marketing ventures, none lasting more than 6 months before collapsing. Yet somehow, each failure only seemed to endear him more to our father, who would shake his head with an affectionate smile and say, "That boy's got ambition. He just needs to find his footing." The contrast in how we were treated became increasingly apparent as the years passed. When Adam needed $20,000 to invest in a friend's startup that eventually went bankrupt, our father wrote the check without question. But when I proposed updating our outdated equipment to increase efficiency, I had to create detailed projections and justify every dollar before he reluctantly approved a fraction of what we needed. "We've always done fine with what we have," he'd say, patting the ancient machinery like an old friend. Why fix what isn't broken? I later learned that my father had bailed Adam out of debt at least 5 times, totaling over $100,000. Meanwhile, I was working 50-hour weeks running the family business on a salary that hadn't increased since I started, driving the same 10-year-old car, and living in a modest apartment to save money. Despite this obvious disparity in treatment, I remained dedicated to the business. I believed that my loyalty and hard work would eventually be recognized and rewarded. I truly thought that proving myself capable of running and growing the business would earn me the respect and fair treatment I deserved. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was. The warning signs were all there, but family dynamics can blind you to what would be obvious in any other professional setting. The foundations for what would eventually become an unbearable situation were being laid, brick by brick, year after year, as I continued pouring my heart and soul into a company where my contributions would never be truly valued. Everything changed when my father had a heart attack 6 years ago. It wasn't major, a warning sign rather than a catastrophic event, but it was serious enough that his doctor insisted he reduce his stress levels and workload immediately. Suddenly, at 29, I found myself thrust into the role of de facto company president while my father recovered. The first few months were incredibly challenging. Although I had worked in nearly every department over the years, actually running the entire operation was a different beast entirely. I was working 14-hour days, learning to juggle payroll, major client relationships, production schedules, and strategic planning all at once. Many nights I slept on the couch in my office, waking up to start another grueling day before the sun rose. "Are you sure you can handle this?" my father would ask during his brief visits to the office, his skepticism barely concealed. Maybe we should bring in an outside consultant to help. But I was determined to prove I could do it not just to him, but to myself and our 40 employees who were counting on me. The learning curve was steep, but I was climbing it. After 3 months of barely staying afloat, I began implementing changes that I had envisioned for years, but had never been able to convince my father to try. We migrated our inventory system to a modern software solution, reducing waste and saving thousands monthly. I introduced flexible scheduling for our floor workers, which improved morale and actually increased productivity by 12%. Our outdated marketing approach received a complete overhaul. I redesigned our website, established our presence on industry platforms, and started attending trade shows that my father had always dismissed as wastes of time and money. Through these efforts, we began attracting clients that had previously only worked with much larger competitors. When my father returned to work part-time 6 months after his heart attack, he seemed genuinely surprised by the positive changes. The company was running more smoothly than ever, and we were on track for our most profitable year in a decade. But old habits die hard. Instead of praise, he focused on the few minor hiccups that had occurred during his absence. "You changed too much too quickly," he said, even as he reviewed the improved financial reports. "You're lucky nothing catastrophic happened." Despite his resistance, the numbers spoke for themselves. Within 18 months under my leadership, we had grown our client base by 35%. Our reputation in the industry was improving, with several major manufacturers now considering us for contracts that would have been unthinkable before. We had even expanded our staff, hiring 5 additional skilled workers to keep up with demand. The staff dynamics had shifted noticeably as well. People who had once gone directly to my father with questions or problems now came to me instead. I had established relationships with all our major clients, many of whom openly preferred dealing with me over my father due to my more collaborative approach and willingness to adapt to their changing needs. During this period, I was essentially doing 2 jobs running day-to-day operations, while also handling the strategic planning and key relationships that would typically be a CEO's responsibility. My salary, however, remained unchanged, despite my repeated gentle suggestions that my compensation should reflect my expanded role. "The business is doing well because of the foundation I built," my father would say dismissively. "You're building your resume and gaining invaluable experience. That's worth more than money at this stage in your career." I sacrificed more than just fair compensation during these years. Friends stopped inviting me to social events because I rarely had time to attend. 2 serious relationships ended because partners grew tired of canceled dates and weekend work emergencies. I missed weddings, birthdays, and family gatherings because the business always came first. My father, meanwhile, had reduced his schedule to about 20 hours per week, spending the rest of his time golfing, traveling, and enjoying the fruits of his labor. Yet he continued drawing his full executive salary more than 3 times what I was making while doing the bulk of the work. Despite these frustrations, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment in what I was building. The company was becoming my vision, and I believed that patience and perseverance would eventually lead to proper recognition, both in title and compensation. The employees respected me, our clients trusted me, and the business was thriving under my leadership. I convinced myself that it would all be worth it when the company eventually became mine, as had been implied since my childhood. I told myself that these were the dues I had to pay the investment I was making in my future. As it turned out, I couldn't have been more wrong. For 5 years, I effectively ran our family business, while my father maintained the title of CEO, but functioned more as a figurehead than an active leader. During this period, we experienced unprecedented growth and success. Our annual revenue increased from $3 million to just over $5 million, a 67% growth, in an industry where 5 to 10% annual growth was considered healthy. We expanded our product line to include custom components for the renewable energy sector, a move that proved particularly lucrative as that industry boomed. This diversification not only increased our revenue, but also protected us from the cyclical downturns that had previously impacted our traditional manufacturing clients. When the economic recession hit 3 years into my leadership, we were one of the few companies in our sector that didn't have to lay off a single employee. Through careful planning and the financial buffers I had built, we weathered the storm while many competitors struggled or closed entirely. We even managed to acquire a small, struggling competitor at a bargain price, expanding our capabilities and client base. Throughout these achievements, my salary remained virtually stagnant. I was earning $72,000 annually, roughly what a mid-level manager would make at a comparable company, not an executive effectively running a multi-million-dollar operation. According to industry standards, someone in my position should have been earning at least $150,000, plus performance bonuses and equity. My personal financial situation reflected this disconnect. At 35, I was still renting an apartment while former classmates, with similar responsibilities, owned homes in upscale neighborhoods. I drove a 10-year-old sedan with over 150,000 miles on it. I had postponed starting a family partly due to financial considerations, even though it was something I deeply wanted. There were subtle signs of my father's lack of appreciation that I either missed or chose to ignore. When clients complimented my leadership during meetings, my father would quickly redirect the conversation to how he had trained me well, or how the company's strong foundation made success possible. If industry publications wanted to interview me about our innovative approaches, he would insist on being included, or would redirect them to speak with him instead. Despite these challenges, my reputation in the industry continued to grow. I was invited to speak at trade conferences and asked to join industry boards. Competitors recognized my value even if my father didn't. Throughout these 5 years, I received no fewer than 7 recruitment attempts from other companies, with offers ranging from nearly double my current salary to executive positions with equity stakes. The most tempting came from our largest competitor, whose CEO approached me directly at an industry event. "Nathan, I'll be blunt," he said over drinks. "You're wasting your talent there. We'd start you at $180,000, with a clear path to partnership within 5 years. Think about it." I did think about it for about a week, before declining. The family business was in my blood. I couldn't imagine walking away from what I had helped build, from what had been promised to me since childhood. I still believed that my father would eventually recognize my contributions, and that the company would one day be mine. This dedication came at a significant personal cost. Friends my age were getting married, buying homes, starting families, all milestones I had postponed while pouring myself into the business. My dating life had become nearly non-existent due to my work schedule. When I did meet someone I connected with, the relationship inevitably suffered from my unavailability and constant stress. "You need to establish better boundaries," my closest friend told me during a rare night out. "The company is consuming your entire life, and I'm not sure your father even appreciates it." Those words struck closer to home than I wanted to admit. A sense of resentment had been building gradually over the years, like water pressure behind a dam. I tried to suppress it, to remain loyal and patient, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. After 5 years of effectively running the company, growing it substantially, and navigating it through challenging economic times, all while being dramatically underpaid, I finally decided it was time to have a serious conversation about my compensation and future with the company. I had proven myself beyond any reasonable doubt. If my father couldn't see my value now, he never would. I spent weeks preparing for this conversation. I created detailed presentations showing the company's growth under my leadership, compiled industry salary data for comparable positions, and outlined my contributions in concrete, undeniable terms. I practiced what I would say, anticipating his potential objections and preparing rational, business-focused responses. With hindsight, I realize I was preparing for a logical business discussion with a rational executive, not for the emotionally charged family dynamic that would actually play out. No amount of charts, data, or logical arguments could overcome decades of established patterns and unspoken expectations. The conversation I was about to have would change everything, but not in the way I had hoped. After 5 years of running the company with only nominal recognition, I knew it was time to address my compensation. I chose a Friday afternoon when business was typically slower, giving us time to talk without interruptions. I brought a professional presentation folder containing all my research company performance metrics under my leadership, industry standards for executive compensation, and a reasonable proposal for adjustment. My father seemed distracted when I entered his office, barely looking up from his computer. "Make it quick, Nathan. I've got a tea time at 4:30. I took a deep breath and launched into my carefully prepared introduction. "Dad, I'd like to discuss my role in the company and my compensation. As you know, I've been effectively running operations for 5 years now, and..." He cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Is this about money again? I thought we settled this last year." We hadn't settled anything. He had dismissed my brief mention of a raise without discussion, but I remained calm and continued, sliding the folder across his desk. "I've prepared some information I think you'll find compelling. Our company has grown by 67% during my leadership. Our client retention is up by 22%. And..." "Nathan," he interrupted again, not even glancing at my materials. "You know how I feel about this. The business is doing well, and you'll benefit from that eventually. This is a family business, not some corporation where executives demand raises every time they have a good quarter." "It's been 5 years, Dad," I said, struggling to keep frustration from my voice. "Not 1 quarter. 5 years of growth, innovation, and profitability. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable, just compensation that reflects my responsibilities and contributions." He finally looked up, his expression hardening. "You know what your problem is? You've always had everything handed to you. When I was your age, I was grateful just to have a job in my father's company. I worked twice as hard as you for half the recognition." The irony of this statement was staggering. I had been working 70-hour weeks for years while he played golf 3 times a week. But I stayed focused on facts, opening the folder to show him the industry salary comparisons. "Someone in my position typically earns between $150,000 and $200,000 annually," I explained. "I'm only asking for $120,000, which is still well below market rate." My father leaned back in his chair, a dismissive smile crossing his face. "You think you could walk into another company tomorrow and command that kind of salary? You've only ever worked here, Nathan. Everything you know, I taught you." Then came the statement that would ultimately change everything. "You're lucky to have this job," he said flatly. "Lucky I've groomed you to eventually take over. There are hundreds of qualified people who would jump at the opportunity you've been given." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Lucky? After 5 years of sacrifice, innovation, and proven results? After growing the company by 2/3 and navigating it through a recession without layoffs? After turning down multiple offers from competitors? "This isn't about luck, Dad," I said quietly. "It's about fair compensation for the value I bring to the company. The value that's reflected in our growth, our client relationships, and our financial statements. "We're family," he replied, as if that explained everything. "The company will be yours someday. That's worth more than any salary increase." "When?" I asked. "When will it be mine? We've never discussed any concrete succession plan or timeline." He shrugged. "When I'm ready to fully retire. Could be 5 years. Could be 15. That's not the point." The conversation continued in circles for another half hour, with my father dismissing every point I made. He wouldn't even consider a modest increase, let alone anything approaching market rate. I left his office feeling defeated, undervalued, and increasingly resentful. The following 2 weeks were tense. Our conversations were strictly business-related and brief. Staff noticed the change in atmosphere, with several asking if everything was okay. I maintained professionalism but couldn't hide my disappointment entirely. Then came the announcement that would turn disappointment into betrayal. My father called an all-staff meeting on Monday morning, something he rarely did. I assumed it was about the quarterly results, or perhaps a new major client. I could not have been more wrong. "I have exciting news," my father began, beaming with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "The company is entering a new phase of growth, and we're bringing in fresh talent to help lead us forward." He gestured to the door as it opened, and in walked my brother Adam, grinning broadly. I hadn't even known he was back in town. "Adam will be joining us as Executive Vice President of Business Development," my father announced proudly. "He brings a wealth of entrepreneurial experience and fresh ideas that will complement our traditional approach." Entrepreneurial experience? My brother's experience consisted of a string of failed ventures that our father had repeatedly bailed out. He had no background in manufacturing, no industry connections, and no formal business education beyond 3 semesters of general studies. Staff members applauded politely, though many looked as confused as I felt. After the meeting, I immediately went to my father's office, closing the door behind me. "What is this about?" I demanded, my composure finally breaking. "Adam knows nothing about our business or industry." "He's a quick learner," my father replied defensively. "And he has qualities you lack: creativity, risk-taking, vision." "Vision?" I repeated incredulously. His last vision was investing in an app that helped people find dog lookalikes. It folded in 4 months. My father's expression hardened. "I've made my decision, Nathan. Adam will focus on new markets and opportunities while you continue managing operations. It's a good division of responsibilities." I would have accepted this explanation, however dubious, if not for what I discovered the following week. While reviewing payroll documents that required my approval as COO, I saw Adam's starting salary, $288,000 annually, exactly 4 times what I was earning after more than a decade with the company. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. 2 weeks after refusing my request for a raise, claiming the company couldn't afford it, my father had hired my inexperienced brother at an executive salary that exceeded even what I had researched as the top-end market rate. When confronted, my father became defensive. Adam had other opportunities. We needed to make a competitive offer. "What opportunities?" I asked, knowing full well my brother had been essentially unemployed for months. "That's not the point," he deflected. "Adam brings a different skill set. We need to diversify our leadership approach." The real message was painfully clear. My years of loyalty, sacrifice, and successful leadership were valued less than my brother's unproven potential. I was expected to train and support the brother who had been handed everything I had spent years working for. The office dynamics quickly became unbearable. Staff members who had worked with me for years approached me privately, expressing confusion and concern about Adam's role and qualifications. Several asked bluntly if I was being pushed out. I maintained professionalism, never criticizing my father or brother publicly, but the strain was evident to everyone. Adam, meanwhile, immediately began throwing his weight around, proposing unrealistic ideas and making promises to clients that we couldn't possibly fulfill. When I attempted to provide guidance or express concerns, He would dismissively say, "Dad thinks it's a great idea," effectively ending any discussion. I had thought nothing could hurt more than my father's "you're lucky" comment. I was wrong. This systematic undermining of my position, this clear statement of how little my contributions were valued, cut deeper than any single remark ever could. For 3 weeks after Adam's arrival, I tried to make the new arrangement work. I told myself that family businesses are complicated, that perhaps Adam would surprise everyone with hidden talents, that maybe this was just my father's misguided attempt to bring both his sons into the family legacy. Each morning, I would arrive at the office and repeat these rationalizations like a mantra. Each evening, I would leave exhausted and demoralized, the weight of the betrayal growing heavier by the day. Adam wasted no time making his presence felt. Within his first week, he committed the company to an expensive trade show that we weren't prepared for, ordered promotional materials with significant design errors, and somehow managed to offend one of our longest-standing clients during what should have been a routine courtesy call. "He's just finding his footing," my father said when I raised concerns. "Remember your first few weeks? You made mistakes too." The comparison was ludicrous. My mistakes as a new graduate had been minor and occurred despite thorough preparation and genuine effort. Adam's were the result of overconfidence and unwillingness to learn the basics before making major decisions. More infuriating was watching my father clean up Adam's messes while continuing to scrutinize my work. When I miscalculated a production timeline by 2 days, I received a stern lecture about attention to detail. When Adam committed us to a contract that would lose money on every unit produced, my father quietly revised the terms himself and never mentioned it again. The situation came to a head when Adam proposed rebranding our company, including changing the name that had represented 3 generations of my family's work. He presented his idea directly to my father, bypassing me entirely despite operations falling under my purview. "Fresh start, fresh image," Adam declared during a meeting, unveiling mock-ups for a new logo and company name that abandoned all connection to our heritage. The old name sounds like a dusty factory from the 50s. "We need something that says innovation and future." I waited for my father to shut down this absurd suggestion. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully. "It's worth considering. The market is changing, and perhaps our image should evolve too." That evening, I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment until 3 in the morning, replaying the day's events and the accumulated slights of the past several weeks. Around 4, a moment of clarity hit me. Nothing was going to change. My father would always see Adam as the golden child with unlimited potential, while viewing me as the reliable but unexceptional workhorse. I spent the remainder of the night drafting my resignation letter. It was respectful but direct, stating simply that I could no longer continue in an environment where my contributions were so clearly undervalued. I didn't mention Adam by name or detail the salary disparity. I didn't need to. My father knew exactly why I was leaving. The next morning, instead of going to the office, I called James Harrington, the CEO of our largest competitor who had tried to recruit me the previous year. We had maintained occasional contact at industry events. "Nathan," he answered warmly, "this is a pleasant surprise. That position you mentioned last year," I said without preamble. "Is it still available?" There was a brief pause. "Not exactly. But for you, we could create something similar. What's changed?" We agreed to meet for lunch that day. I was frank about my situation without bad-mouthing my family or our business. James listened attentively, occasionally nodding as if my story confirmed suspicions he'd had about our company's dynamics. "Family businesses can be the best and worst environments," he said after I finished. "Let me be clear about what we can offer. Executive Vice President of Operations, starting at $110,000 with performance bonuses that could add another $30,000 to $40,000 annually. Full benefits package, including retirement matching, and most importantly, a clear path to equity partnership after 3 years if performance targets are met." The salary was over 50% higher than what I was currently making, with bonuses potentially pushing it to double my current compensation. But more valuable than the money was the respect implied by the offer recognition of my skills and experience that had been lacking at the family business. I accepted on the spot. We agreed I would start in 3 weeks, giving me time to ensure a proper handover of my responsibilities. The next morning, I arrived at the office early and placed my resignation letter on my father's desk before anyone else arrived. Then I began clearing out personal items from my office, a process that was both cathartic and emotional. Each award, each photo, each memento represented years of dedication to a company that had ultimately failed to reciprocate my loyalty. My father stormed into my office an hour later, resignation letter clutched in his hand. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, face flushed with anger. "Exactly what it says," I replied calmly. "My 2 weeks' notice." "You can't just quit," he sputtered. "This is your family's company, your future." "Is it?" I asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it seems like Adam's future, not mine." "This is about Adam? For God's sake, Nathan. There's room for both of you here." "At drastically different valuations, apparently," I said. "I've accepted a position with Harrington Manufacturing. I start in 3 weeks." The color drained from my father's face. James Harrington was his longtime industry rival. "You're going to work for James? That's practically treason." "It's business," I corrected him. "They've offered me fair compensation for my skills and experience, something I couldn't get here." What followed was a barrage of emotional manipulation tactics. First came anger. "After everything I've done for you." Then, guilt. "This will break your mother's heart," followed by dire predictions. "You'll fail miserably out there without my guidance." And finally, desperate bargaining. "Let's discuss a raise, maybe a new title." But it was too late. The spell had been broken. I saw clearly now what I had been unwilling to admit for years. I would never be valued appropriately in my father's company. No raise or title could repair the fundamental breach of trust that had occurred. "My decision is final," I said when he finally ran out of arguments. "I'll ensure a smooth transition of my responsibilities before I leave." I walked out of the office that evening feeling lighter than I had in years, despite the emotional turmoil of the day. For the first time in my adult life, I was charting my own course rather than following the path that had been laid out for me since childhood. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. My first day at Harrington Manufacturing felt surreal. After 15 years at the family business, walking into a different office, greeting new colleagues, and setting up a new workspace was disorienting. The company was larger than ours, with over 100 employees compared to our 40, and operated with more formal processes and structures. James gave me a warm welcome, introducing me to department heads and key team members. "Nathan brings exceptional experience and industry knowledge," he told them. "We're fortunate to have him on our team." This public acknowledgement of my value, something my father had rarely offered, was both validating and slightly uncomfortable. I wasn't accustomed to such direct praise. The adjustment period was challenging. I had to learn new systems, understand different organizational dynamics, and establish relationships with staff who were initially wary of the new executive. Some viewed me with suspicion, wondering if I would import practices from my family's competing business or if I was simply using Harrington as leverage to negotiate a better position back at my father's company. What I hadn't anticipated was the profound sense of freedom I experienced. For the first time, I could make decisions based solely on business merits without navigating complex family dynamics. I could propose ideas without them being dismissed because that's not how we've always done it. I could focus entirely on performance without worrying about sibling rivalries or parental approval. My compensation package reflected this professional environment. My base salary of $110,000 was supplemented by comprehensive benefits, including health insurance with better coverage than I'd had before, retirement contributions, and performance bonuses. Including all components, my total compensation was approximately 52% higher than what I'd been earning at the family business. The most unexpected development came about 2 weeks after I started at Harrington. I received calls from 3 significant clients I had worked with at my father's company. They had heard about my move and wanted to discuss bringing their business to Harrington. "It's nothing personal against your father," one client explained, "but we've been working directly with you for years. You understand our needs, you're responsive, and frankly, we trust your judgment." I was careful not to actively poach clients that would have crossed an ethical line I wasn't willing to breach. But when clients reached out directly, expressing dissatisfaction with recent changes at my father's company, I couldn't turn away legitimate business opportunities for my new employer. Within 2 months, 7 former clients had transferred their business to Harrington, representing approximately 20% of my father's annual revenue. It wasn't a coordinated exodus, but rather individual decisions made by clients who valued the relationships I had built with them over many years. Meanwhile, news from my former workplace filtered through industry channels. Without my guidance, Adam had accelerated his ill-conceived rebranding initiative, alienating longtime clients who valued the company's heritage and reputation. He had committed to several expensive ventures with questionable returns, straining the company's cash reserves. Most concerning, quality control. Once our hallmark had begun to slip as experienced staff departed, uncomfortable with the new leadership style. My father's initial reaction was predictable. He called me in a fury, accusing me of stealing clients and betraying the family. I remained calm, explaining that I hadn't solicited any business. Clients had made their own decisions based on their needs and preferences. As the months passed, his tone gradually shifted from anger to concern, and finally to something approaching desperation. "The business is struggling, Nathan," he admitted 6 months after I'd left. "We've lost more clients than just the ones who followed you. Production delays are increasing. Adam's ideas aren't working out as we hoped." There was a part of me, a small, wounded part, that took satisfaction in this validation. But mostly, I felt sad. The company my grandfather had built, that my father had grown, and that I had modernized was faltering. Decades of history and community impact were at risk. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely. "But I'm not in a position to help anymore. You could come back," he suggested tentatively. "We could discuss a better arrangement, better compensation, more authority." "Thank you, but no," I replied. "I've made commitments here that I intend to honor." My personal life flourished alongside my professional growth. With reasonable working hours and significantly reduced stress, I began rebuilding neglected friendships and pursuing interests I had set aside for years. I joined a recreational basketball league, took weekend hiking trips, and even started taking cooking classes, simple pleasures that had seemed impossible during my years of all-consuming work at the family business. 4 months after starting at Harrington, I met Elise at one of those cooking classes. She was smart, independent, and refreshingly straightforward. Our relationship developed naturally, without the constant interruptions of work emergencies that had plagued my previous relationships. Within a year, we were discussing marriage and looking at houses together, major life steps that had seemed perpetually out of reach before. With my improved financial situation, I was able to purchase my first home, a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom house in a pleasant neighborhood. After years of renting, the sense of ownership and permanence was profoundly satisfying. Former colleagues began reaching out as well. First came casual lunches to catch up, which inevitably included questions about opportunities at Harrington. Eventually, 3 key employees from my father's company joined Harrington, bringing valuable skills and institutional knowledge with them. Throughout this period, my father continued making occasional overtures, ranging from business propositions to emotional appeals about family loyalty. Each time, I maintained professional courtesy while firmly declining any suggestion of returning. The company that had once been the center of my identity was now firmly in my past. What surprised me most was my lack of regret. Despite 15 years of investment in the family business, walking away had been the right decision. The company's decline without me, while sad, confirmed what I had long suspected but never fully acknowledged. My contributions had been far more vital to its success than my father had ever recognized. 3 years have passed since I walked away from the family business, and looking back, That difficult decision marked the beginning of the most fulfilling chapter of my life so far. At Harrington Manufacturing, I've been promoted to Chief Operations Officer, with oversight of all production facilities and a seat on the executive leadership team. My compensation has continued to increase, now more than triple what I was earning at my father's company. Professionally, I've received recognition that would have been unimaginable before. Last year, I was named one of the industry's 40 under 40 emerging leaders by our main trade publication, an honor my father had received in his day, but would never have supported my nomination for while I worked under him. My personal life has flourished alongside my career. Elise and I married last spring in a ceremony that felt like a celebration not just of our union, but of the new life I had created for myself. We're expecting our first child in a few months, a daughter. We live in a beautiful home in a neighborhood we love, and for the first time in my adult life, I have a healthy work-life balance that allows me to fully engage with both aspects of my life. My relationship with my family remains complicated. My mother, who had always remained somewhat neutral in the business disputes, maintains regular contact. We meet for lunch monthly, and she visits our home occasionally, though she's careful to avoid discussing the family business. My father and I have established a cautious, limited reconciliation. After the initial anger and recriminations faded, we settled into an uneasy truce. We see each other at major family events and exchange cordial conversation, but the closeness we once shared has not returned. I've accepted that it probably never will. The family business itself has contracted significantly. My brother Adam lasted only 18 months before leaving to pursue yet another entrepreneurial venture, this one funded by a substantial loan from the company's dwindling reserves. My father, now approaching 70, returned to full-time management but struggled to rebuild what had been lost. They've downsized to half their former staff and moved to a smaller facility. Last year, during a rare private conversation at a family wedding, my father finally acknowledged some hard truths. "I handled things poorly with you, Nathan," he said, staring into his drink rather than meeting my eyes. "I took your loyalty for granted. I see that now." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my proud father, it was significant. I simply nodded and thanked him for the acknowledgement. Some wounds heal with time, but the scars remain. The experience forced me to confront difficult realities about family dynamics, especially in business contexts. I spent nearly 2 years in therapy, working through the complicated emotions of anger, betrayal, guilt, and grief that accompanied my separation from the family business. Through that process, I've distilled several crucial life lessons that might help others in similar situations. First, your professional worth isn't determined by family obligations. Skills, experience, and results deserve appropriate recognition and compensation, regardless of familial relationships. Allowing yourself to be undervalued because it's family only leads to resentment and burnout. Second, loyalty should always be reciprocal. One-sided dedication isn't sustainable and ultimately harms both parties. A healthy relationship, personal or professional, requires mutual respect and appreciation. Third, sometimes walking away is the healthiest choice, even from situations you've invested years in. The sunk cost fallacy keeps many people trapped in dysfunctional arrangements far longer than they should be. Fourth, setting boundaries with family is necessary and valid, particularly in business contexts. Clear separation between family roles and business roles is essential for both relationships to thrive. Fifth, your identity exists independently from family expectations or traditions. Finding your own path may disappoint others initially, but ultimately leads to greater personal fulfillment and authentic relationships. The experience has profoundly shaped my own management style. At Harrington, I've established mentorship programs for promising employees, ensuring they receive both recognition and constructive feedback. I advocate strongly for fair compensation based on performance rather than tenure or personal connections. Most importantly, I create an environment where people feel valued for their contributions rather than taken for granted. My relationship with the family business world has evolved as well. I've become something of an informal advisor to others navigating similar situations, speaking occasionally at industry events about succession planning and family business dynamics. These conversations are often cathartic, revealing how common my experience was while providing others with perspective and potential paths forward. Would I have chosen this path had my father treated me fairly from the beginning? Probably not. I would likely have remained with the family business, eventually taking over when my father retired. But the painful experience of being undervalued and ultimately betrayed forced me to discover strengths and opportunities I might never have otherwise pursued. As I prepare to become a parent myself, I've thought deeply about what kind of legacy I want to create for my daughter. It won't include an expectation that she follow in my professional footsteps or fulfill my unfulfilled dreams. Instead, I hope to support her in discovering her own passions and values, recognizing her worth independent of my expectations. If you're watching this and finding yourself in a similar situation, undervalued at a family business, caught in toxic dynamics, or struggling with the decision to stay or go, know that there is life beyond those constraints. Your worth isn't determined by others' inability to see it. Sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the greatest growth. I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Have you worked in a family business? Experienced the golden child syndrome? Made the difficult choice to walk away from something you'd invested years in? Each experience is unique, but sharing them helps all of us feel less alone in these challenges. Please like this video if you found my story helpful, and subscribe to the channel for more real-life experiences and lessons learned. Share with anyone you think might benefit from hearing that sometimes the best family decision is choosing yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. Whatever challenges you're facing in your family or professional life, I hope you find the clarity and courage to make choices that honor your true worth.